So here we all are practicing social distancing. We know exactly what it looks like, why we're doing it, and how to enforce it. But when it comes to setting personal boundaries, we don't exactly have those guidelines because it's different from person to person. So it's up to each of us to create and enforce our own personal boundaries. But this can be difficult, especially when you've spent a lifetime doing the exact opposite. This is something that I've struggled with myself, and I think most people who have been in relationships with narcissists or other emotionally abusive people also struggle with boundaries. In this video, we're going to cover what are boundaries and why are they important, why narcissists so often trample boundaries, and 6 signs you have weak boundaries and what to do about it. So let's get started. Welcome to the Common Ego community. My name is Christina, and on this channel we talk about emotional abuse, its connection with spirituality, and we attempt to answer the question, where do we go from here? So if that all sounds good to you, be sure you're subscribed, and let's jump into today's topic of boundaries. So I'm going to start with the basics because I've gotten a few questions about it, like what are boundaries exactly? Boundaries are rules and limits that we set in our interactions with other people. So it's not about controlling someone else. It's about protecting yourself. And ultimately, it's all about the behavior that you will accept into your life from that other person. And boundaries are important for everyone. Everyone should have boundaries. Parents should have boundaries with kids. You should have boundaries with your parents and with your colleagues. Everyone should have healthy boundaries. But there's a chance, especially if you've been a victim of emotional abuse, there's a chance that there's some weakness within your boundaries that you could benefit from strengthening. Okay, so in defining boundaries, I want to point out that there are different types of boundaries. There are physical boundaries, there are material boundaries, there are emotional boundaries. And in this video today, we're going to be talking mostly about emotional boundaries. And there's some overlap with physical and emotional boundaries, but the emotional boundaries are what leave us exposed to the emotional abuse. So if you don't have firm boundaries and you happen to encounter an abusive person, you're likely to experience emotional abuse. All right, so there are 2 types of emotional boundaries, internal and external. So the internal boundary is the boundary that most people who identify as empaths or highly sensitive people or codependents struggle with, because this is about separating your own emotional stuff from someone else's. So the external behavior is about setting those firm limits and communicating them to another person about what you will and will not accept from them. So why do narcissists push boundaries? And there's one main reason why they push boundaries, and that's because they feel entitled. They're entitled to everything. They're entitled to your thoughts on anything they want to know. They're entitled to your feelings, to knowing your feelings and picking that apart. They're entitled to getting closer to you than they deserve to be. But of course, they're not actually entitled to that. They just think they are. And you're going to see this entitlement firsthand when you start to enforce those boundaries, because a narcissist is always going to take your personal boundaries as an attack on them. Healthy boundaries are an attack on no one, but a narcissist will see it as an attack on their ability to get supply. And you can kind of understand why they would think that after learning a little bit about narcissism. But if you're questioning this at all, think of it this way. If you put a flea repellent on your dog, not a flea killer, but a flea repellent on your dog, you are not attacking the fleas. What you're doing is you're protecting the dog. So the flea repellent will keep the fleas away. It's not hurting them. It's just keeping them away. Setting boundaries with a narcissist is very much the same. You are setting rules in place to protect yourself from someone who has proven that they are emotionally abusive. Okay, so now it's time to check in with ourselves. How strong do you think your boundaries are today? I have 6 signs that your boundaries may not be as strong as you think they are. And if none of these 6 things apply to you, then maybe your boundaries are very strong. And if not, then we're going to cover a few things that you can do to strengthen those boundaries. Okay. So let's get started with 6 signs your boundaries are weak. And the first one is that you overshare information. Maybe not even with a narcissist, but just in general, you tend to be an oversharer. The second sign your boundaries may be weak is that you have trouble saying no. This is that people-pleasing element that so many of us struggle with. So the third sign that your boundaries are weak is that you are highly reactive to other people's emotions. You may take on other people's emotions when you're having a conversation with them. If they are angry or sad, you may take that stuff on to yourself. It weighs you down. But with this also, you're going to be very triggered by their unkind words. You're going to be very emotionally reactive to anything they say. The fourth sign that your boundaries may need a little strengthening is that you have a fear of rejection, a strong fear of rejection. And as a result, you adjust your behaviors and your personality to prevent any sort of rejection. So the fifth sign that your boundaries may be weak is that you rely very heavily on other people's opinions. So their opinion of you and the things that you do. So if you can relate to this, you might not like making decisions without asking a bunch of people what they think about it, or even just like special people in your life that maybe there's one person you always turn to. I have to know what this person thinks before I can make a decision. And sometimes this happens as a result of being in an emotionally abusive relationship too. But if this is something that you have always known is true about yourself, then it may be a boundary issue. So the sixth sign that your boundaries may be weak is that you've been in an emotionally abusive relationship and you haven't worked on your boundaries afterwards. So working on things like self-love and self-care are super important after these relationships, and learning about boundaries and what's healthy and what's not. So if you haven't done any of that, then there's a good chance that your boundaries are still a little bit weak. But don't worry, because there are things that you can do to strengthen your boundaries. It's never too late, and it's always going to be a process. It's going to be something that we all have to work on, especially if we've been in a place where we've had weak boundaries before, as many of us have. When you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, they're definitely triggering wounds within you. I talk about this in my emotional guidance series, so I'm going to link to that if you're interested. But they also do a lot of projection. So a lot of what they put on you isn't really yours. And if you're the kind of person who takes it on yourself, then that could really, really weigh you down. So how do you set boundaries with a narcissist or with anyone else? So the first thing you can do is decide what behavior you will allow and what you won't. Even if this is a departure from the norm, even if this is completely the opposite of what you used to allow before, and especially if it's the opposite of what you used to allow before. So essentially what you're doing is you're changing your mind about how you want this relationship to look, and you're allowed to do that. Do not let a narcissist tell you that you're not. Don't let somebody who changes their mind more than they change their underwear tell you that you can't do this. Boundaries are well within your rights and they're well within your power. So the second thing you can do when the narcissist tries to trample that boundary, because they will. So what you can do is just call out their behavior. If you've decided that you will not accept yelling, as soon as they yell, the conversation is over. If they start yelling, call it out. There you are, you're yelling. This conversation is over. You can also set a boundary about personal information. So if the narcissist is trying to get information from you and you don't want to share personal information, which is a good idea not to share personal information with a narcissist, when they ask a question that crosses that boundary, let them know. Call it out. Tell them that's something that I do not want to discuss. Let's talk about something else, or let's end the conversation. And another thing you can do to enforce boundaries when you're talking to a narcissist is, as soon as you get to that point, as soon as you get to the point where you're feeling triggered, shift that focus back to yourself, because that's where the trigger is. What's going on, the emotions that you're feeling are here. They're not over where the narcissist is. They may be triggering them, but those feelings are here. And that person, it's really important to understand this. That person, especially if you're dealing with a narcissist, is not going to fix it for you. Whatever you can do, whatever, maybe yelling might make you feel temporarily better, but it's not going to fix it. It's not going to fix whatever's going on in here, whatever that person has triggered. So if you're going to react, what's going to happen is that, like with anything else in the narcissist's life, they're going to take that emotional reaction and use it to their advantage if they possibly can. So essentially what's happening here is you have the narcissist in your face triggering you. You're feeling an emotional reaction. You're experiencing that, whether it's anger or hurt or whatever it is. You're experiencing some sort of reaction and you want to respond. Your ego wants to respond. And if you do, that emotion that you had, you're releasing it. You're putting it out there for the narcissist to take and use against you. So they're using your own emotions, your own reactions as a weapon against you. It's extremely important to, once you've set that boundary and you've enforced it, shift that focus back to yourself. And if it's appropriate, if you feel it's necessary, walk away from that person. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about boundaries for now. We've covered a lot, so I'm going to stop here. And if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you want to see more like it, be sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. And I'll see you in the next video.